I'm Stu Bailey, curator at the Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, and on this episode we're going to go behind the wings with one of the most vulnerable aircraft of the Vietnam War that was flown low and slow over the jungle by forward air control pilots, the O-2 Skymaster. We'll explore the history of this aircraft and take a look at its design features. And to make the episode even better, we have an O-2 pilot with us to tell his stories of flying the Skymaster.
Sometimes there were no fighters, then the FAC became kind of a pseudo fighter pilot. You can do everything right and still get killed. You can do everything wrong and make it home.
This one is going to be cool. It's time to go behind the wings. We're here at the Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, where we have over 60 air and spacecraft in this historic World War II hangar. And one of them is the Cessna O-2 Skymaster. Let's take a closer look. Since its beginning, aviation helped military commanders control the battlefield. During the Vietnam War, this role became even more critical due to the unconventional and fluid nature of combat in the dense jungle terrain. Forward air controllers, or FACs, were military pilots who played a key role in providing information and protecting troops on the ground. As the eyes in the sky, FACs spotted enemy movement and directed fighters and bombers in support of U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Beginning in 1966, the U.S. Air Force turned to Cessna to build a military version of its civilian Model 337 Skymaster to supplement and replace the older Cessna O-1 Bird Dog in the FAC role. The Skymaster's twin-engine push-pull configuration provided added redundancy over hostile territory and allowed for easier single-engine handling. Its high-mounted wing also offered excellent downward visibility. Aside from a single protective plate beneath the seats, the aircraft had no armor. Despite this lack of protection, FAC pilots were often tasked with flying into extremely dangerous situations, acting as a link between troops on the ground and attack aircraft carrying bombs, missiles, and napalm. FACs marked targets by firing white phosphorus rockets that produced visible white smoke. By 1969, the O-2 Skymaster was gradually replaced in combat by the larger OV-10 Bronco. Today, a small number of O-2A Skymasters remain flying, appearing in air shows and at fly-ins around the country. Now that we've learned a little bit about the O-2's history, let's talk with Skymaster Pilot Art Elser. Art, thanks for coming out to do this today. How did you get involved in flying and specifically flying the O-2?
I grew up in World War II, and I was 6 years old when the war started, and I grew up on Long Island, and Republic Aircraft was building P-47 Thunderbolts. Grumman Aircraft was building Hellcats and Avengers and Wildcats for the Navy. So the sky was full of airplanes. I'd climb up the top of a tree and watch them go by. I've wanted to fly since I was 6 or 7 years old. I went through the Air Force Academy. I was in the first class, and so I spent 3 years here at Lowry, and then went down to the Academy site for my last year. And then went off to pilot training. Went through T-34, T-37, T-33s, and got my wings, and then was assigned to the 42nd Air Refueling Squadron in Maine. But the war was going on in Vietnam, and I wanted to be in the middle of it. I was a warrior, and I had trained to go do that. So I wound up going through the O-1 FAC training school we called FAC-U. And then when I got to Da Nang, where my squadron was, they said, oh, we've transitioned to O-2s. So they sent me down for about 2 weeks of training to fly the O-2, then went back to Da Nang and flew out of Da Nang for a while.
How would you describe how it was to fly it?
The mission that we had as forward air controllers was to discover enemy targets, and once we had a target in sight, call in fighters and direct them to put their bombs or napalm or guns, whatever, rockets, on the enemy position. The O-2 was not designed as a FAC airplane, so you had to wrestle it around in the sky a little bit. We would get to point A and spend half an hour or an hour there in tight circles, putting rockets on the ground, directing fighters, dodging enemy guns, that sort of thing.
Well, Art, you started out flying KC-135, so basically an airliner type thing. What was it like switching to a smaller aircraft like the O-2?
When I got into the O-1 and then O-2, I was by myself. So it was, fly the airplane And it was in a combat situation with people shooting at me sometimes. 30 minutes of combat was like 25 refueling missions in terms of the energy it took to fly the mission.
What was a typical mission like for you flying in the O-2?
I had several different missions. I flew out of Khartoum, which was over on the border close to Laos, and we flew on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And those were day missions. And we would go out and we would look for enemy trucks moving up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail supplying ammunition and weapons for the Viet Cong. Often they would hear us coming and they'd pull off the road, go under the jungle canopy, and they would go out with branches and sweep the tracks so you couldn't see where they went in.
Well, I know there's a lot of great stories you have. Let's take a look at the airplane and we'll kind of cover them as we go around here. Let's take a walk around, start at the front end of the airplane.
This airplane, as a civilian airplane, gross weight was 1,000 pounds less than this airplane. So it didn't fly well on one engine. I had a fire light, had to shut the rear engine down, and it was just a powered glide all the way back to the runway. The joke among O-2 pilots was having a second engine was good because the engine that was still running would get you to the crash site.
Art, what are some of the differences that were in this aircraft that made it different from the civilian version?
One of the most obvious differences was that the civilian version had a spinner. And one of the things that they discovered was that the spinner actually fed cooling air to the engine. When they took the spinner off to save money, they found out that the engine would overheat, so they had to put big cowl flaps in to allow air to come through the engine and cool it.
Let's talk about some of the other things that made this a military aircraft, such as the hard points. So come on around this way. What can you tell me about the armaments that you guys carried?
Well, this airplane only has one hard point. The other one had another one about 2 feet out from that. And at night we would carry flares on that outboard one. All the missions we carried had these 2.75-inch rockets, and these were white phosphorus that we used to mark targets. Sometimes there were no fighters or helicopter gunships to be had. Then the FAC became kind of a pseudo fighter pilot, and I would wind up rolling in and firing a Willie Pete rocket at the enemy position, hoping to scare them off.
Art, when you would call in the fighters, what type of aircraft were you working with?
Well, most of the time we got F-100s. That was one of the major airplanes over there. Later on, there got to be more F-4s, more F-4 wings, and we'd get a lot of F-4s. My favorite of all the airplanes, if I had troops in contacts, was the A-1, old Korean War airplane that the Navy had, that the Air Force had a bunch of them. They could come and spend 4 hours on the target if you needed to, and they could drop 4 cans of napalm, a bunch of CBU cluster bomb units, could stay around and strafe with their 20-millimeter cannons. They were just all around good guys to have.
Let's take a look inside the cockpit to see what your office space was like when you were working.
Okay, the cockpit is pretty standard airplane cockpit. You've got your basic 6 instruments here. This is a gun sight. I never used it ever, and I didn't know anybody else who did. In this section of the cockpit are radios. We had 3 radios we had to be talking on almost simultaneously. And you had the fighters who had UHF. They couldn't listen to the ground guys. We were translating back and forth all the time between them. The office suddenly became very, very busy. Over here we have things like engine temperatures, oil temperature, fuel tanks, that sort of thing.
What's it like getting back in the cockpit after so long? Just bring back good memories, bad memories?
I had a mission with a kid who was behind me at the academy in my squadron. He was a freshman in my squadron when I was a senior. And we were in the O-2. He was in this left seat. I was in the right seat. We went out to Ashaw Valley to try to rescue 2 Marines who had been shot down the day before. We took a round that came through the side of the airplane, through the instrument panel, over the top of my legs. I was in this right seat. The jacket hit him in the neck. It was like some linebacker had hit him in the head and slammed him up against the side of the airplane. He had the only ceramic helmet in our squadron. There were probably 25 or 30 of us. Had I been sitting here, it would have gone through my white Air Force helmet in my ear, cleared out my brain, and blew it out the other side of my head. That was a perfect example of fate. If I'd been there, I'd be dead. Within a week, we all had ceramic helmets. I think you become fatalistic. You can do everything right and still get killed. You can do everything wrong and make it home. Second half of my tour when I was flying Special Forces support, and an Army O-1 had taken off just ahead of me. All of a sudden I heard that we were taking ground fire, and one of the rocket pods started sputtering. The only way that bullet could have gotten where it was to go right past my head and hit the rocket pod. You're either going to make it or you're not going to make it. There's not much you can do. We had teams that we put in Laos. Their primary mission was reconnaissance, and we dropped these guys in by Huey, usually having A-1s just in case they ran into a hot LZ. Every time one of us flew past them, we'd check in with them, make a comm check to make sure they were okay. And I went through one morning and I called and I said, "Hey, how's it going down there?" And I got a whispered reply back, "We're in trouble." And that was it. And I said, "Okay, key your mic twice for yes, once for no. Are you surrounded?" Click, click. "Do you want me to stay around?" Click. "But not too far away."
Well, Art, that was some really incredible stories. Let's finish up our tour of the airplane, taking a look at the back end. Looking back on all of it, what would you say is the legacy of the O-2?
Well, I think the legacy was that it was a wonderful interim airplane. Came before the OV-10. The O-1 was too slow, kept the Ho Chi Minh Trail from being too successful. It scared a lot of pilots because it wasn't built for the mission. Our airplanes had G meters, and we almost always had to zero the G meter before we let the crew chief see it because we had to pull so many Gs. I mean, we over-G'd the airplane all the time, and it just held together. This airplane was not easy to maintain. When you take an airplane that was designed to haul grandma to Thanksgiving dinner and put it in a combat environment where people are flying it like it was an F-4, the guys on the ground, I mean, you'd land sometimes and they'd yank an instrument off the instrument panel and run over to the next airplane and put it in there so it could fly. The maintenance guys were just really, really wonderful, and they're unsung. Nobody talks about them.
So, Art, what kind of advice would you give to young people that are interested in getting into flying?
It's the most wonderful thing in the whole world is to fly. I've wanted to fly since I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I was just blessed to be able to fly for 20 years in the Air Force, 4,700 hours, 900 in combat, 400 plus combat missions, and I only had 2 holes in the airplane.
Well, Art, thank you so much for your time and the great stories. Really much appreciate you coming out today to tell us all about the O-2.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun going back 50-some years and thinking about this bird.
We couldn't cover everything in this episode, so please leave your comments and questions below the video, and we'll get to as many as we can. And come to the museum and see the O-2 along with all our other Vietnam-era aircraft. We've made it to the end of the video, and if you subscribe, thank you. If not, well, just do it already, okay? Now I gotta get back to work. We'll see you later. Bye.